so we sort of start all these off with the same question. Sort of what was your life like growing up, and what were you like growing up? What's your background?
What was I like growing up? That's interesting. So I grew up in Pakistan, where, I mean, you really don't associate golf in Pakistan. I think I was maybe one of like 500 people that played there, maybe like a couple thousand, so not many people. I grew up, I would say my dad was a business guy. Like, he started a tech company over there. So I grew up around like the entrepreneurship culture in, I would say it's not the Silicon Valley entrepreneurship culture, but it still was somewhat through my family. But I also grew up with a sense that education was really important. So for my parents, education was really important. They wouldn't cut any corners. They sent me to the best schools. And that, I would say that ethos, that mindset was, since it was really important for my parents, eventually became really important for me. But I did grow up playing a lot of sports. I grew up playing golf, tennis, cricket, squash. So those were, so I was a good athlete, but I was a pretty good student. And I would say my life was somewhat balanced between sports and education. My parents would let me play as many sports as I wanted, as long as I was getting the grades that they wanted. So that was kind of like the trade we had.
Was entrepreneurship always on the horizon, and did you have any big influences? You mentioned your family was entrepreneurial.
Yeah, I would say when I was younger, I mean, it certainly influenced me. My father started a company that ended up becoming like the biggest telecom company in Pakistan. So I saw that like basically go from zero to that. I didn't really think that would influence me, but I would say if I look back, it certainly did, because once I went to college and started working, I joined a large organization. It was like in the medical industry. I was doing software programming, but I found it really boring. And then I started thinking about, like if I'm getting up every day, not really excited about what I'm doing, I'm kind of wasting my life. And you only have one life to live, so why not make it exciting? And so I think I had like 2 years of that. I realized, okay, work doesn't have to be really boring. Work doesn't have to be almost like torture. Work can be really fun. And so I quit my job and joined a startup, and that totally changed, I would say, my perspective on work, where I think before that, I was taught, I would say work and fun were like two separate things. And after that, I would say the line between them is blurrier for me, where I would say they fall essentially, the closer they are, the better you do in life, is how I view it.
Was there a moment that you remember that you kind of went over that hump, that I've had enough of this and I'm going to pursue what I love first?
Yeah, I think it, in terms of like after college, I would say like the moment was, I had like a couple of competing things. So one, I had to have a job to stay in the US as an immigrant. Now I'm a citizen, but as an immigrant, you need a work visa. So I couldn't really quit and do something. I'd actually tried to start a company right after college. So I'd gotten a little bit of taste of startup life, where you kind of have to figure everything out yourself. There are no paths that are set for you. And that was exciting, but I couldn't do it for multiple reasons. One of them being that I needed a visa to stay in the country. And I actually really loved being in America, so I wanted to stay here for the rest of my life. So I had to find a job that would allow me to stay. I would say in terms of the moment, it was literally, I actually quit on my birthday, so I don't know whether that was related or not. But maybe that, it was my, what was it, like my 25th birthday maybe?
Sounds like a number that you make a life change around.
Yeah, I guess like you're like, okay, what have I done for these 25 years? Kind of like, what am I doing now for the next 25? I don't really think, I think it was just building up.
Yep.
Where I was like, okay, now I need to do something. Let me figure out what to do.
What was that first startup you did right after school?
It was an electronic health records startup. So actually, I played college tennis at Ohio Wesleyan, and I was the captain of the tennis team. And my tennis coach had just finished his MBA from Ohio State, and was doing consulting with, at the time it was Arthur Andersen, and Arthur Andersen now is Accenture or something. They had like a huge scandal, and they were basically selling off their assets. And the project that he'd worked on was a health records project for one of the hospitals. And we were like, well, let's buy this. And basically, you could buy anything from Andersen at that time for no money.
Yeah.
And so we got the rights to that software, and our goal was to turn that project for one hospital into basically a product for multiple hospitals. But that was around the time when the dot-com bubble burst, and so it was like really hard to raise money. So all those things happened. I still think the idea had legs. A lot of times my belief is it's all about execution. But I didn't have the ability to actually do that and stay in the country. So those were like, it was a little complicated.
Were there any big lessons you learned from that, and what were they, or was it just, I need to make sure I'm going to be able to be here for a long time before I jump into another?
I would say like the biggest lesson I learned from that was that I loved it.
Yeah.
Like, this is exciting. I would say realized that you kind of have to go all in to make something succeed. It's when you're building something. Can actually people hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So I think what I learned was, one, I love it. Two, you kind of got to go all in.
Yep.
If you half-ass a startup, it's probably not going to go anywhere. It's like very unlikely. I'd say those were kind of my two main things that I remember from that experience.
So you got a corporate job, and then you went to another startup with somebody else's. Could you tell us a little bit about what that was, what you were doing, and kind of what your big takeaways were? Did you get a lot from being a part of somebody else's baby?
Yeah, so it was a CRM startup. So that was a competitor to Salesforce.com. Ended up, it was in Pittsburgh, and I moved to Pittsburgh. I was living in Columbus, Ohio before that. And luckily in Pittsburgh, that's where I met my wife, who's here today. So that all worked out great. But I would say, so the startup was essentially a CRM system where you're putting in information about your customers. It's like the electronic health records for your customers. And then it was the differentiation for us versus Salesforce.com was it was like process oriented. So if you have an extended sales cycle, there's a process, and now you can track how your salespeople are doing, where each deal is in the process. I'd say the things I learned from that, one, like I loved getting up in the morning and going to work. I was able to do multiple things. I was actually able to make an impact. I would say in the big organization that I was in, I was at the bottom of the totem pole, literally no visibility into my impact, and I felt like it was important for me to see like the results of the work I'm doing. And once I got to the startup, got thousands, or I think we had a few thousand users at that point. We ended up getting a whole bunch of users. But just even those 1,000 users, like when you make a change, so I was a data architect, and so my job was to make sure the system scales as users grow and the queries are fast. So when somebody searches for a customer, it's quick, or the information they're loading is quick. And so you'd hear like if stuff was slow, like people would send emails complaining because it was like their work that were like slowing them down. And I would say the ability to, one, hear that firsthand, and two, respond to it was really exciting. Because you felt, or at least I felt, like everything I'm doing is touching people, hopefully making their lives better, whether it's for work or whatever. And so I would say that level of direct, unfiltered interaction I thought was really exciting. And even though it was somebody else's startup, I felt really bought in. So I think the thing, if you get the startup culture right, where there's enough transparency that you understand why people are doing, what you're doing, what direction the company is going to go in, where you want to take it, what the possibilities are, I think then it doesn't necessarily feel like somebody else's startup. It starts feeling like yours too. And I think that's key for startup success, is like the people that are there bought into the vision. And so we had a really good team where people were bought in. I was bought in as like a data architect and a relatively junior engineer. So that was really exciting.
Cool. So you then went back to business school. What motivated that move?
So I was there for 4 years. We ended up getting acquired by a public company. And my goal always was, I would say, ever since that first, once I got out of college and started the company, the electronic health record company, I was always like, okay, I want to start something. But I realized, actually, I would say one other thing I realized early on was like, okay, I probably need to learn a few things. And because certainly the health industry is so complicated, you really have to learn it. So that kind of gave me a sense that I actually have a lot of learning to do still. And I felt like what I'd done since college was really understand. I'd grown in the engineering organization. We ended up when I joined, we're like 10 people. We ended up going up all the way to 100 people. I became, I would say, one of the top engineers in the company, with like 30 or 40 engineers reporting to me. So I got a sense of, I felt like my understanding of like the technical side of startups was good enough where I could do something on my own. But I'd never thought of anything from like a true business perspective. Like, what does it entail to negotiate something? How do you raise money? How do you hire the right people? All that stuff, like, I had no idea about. And I would say I also felt like I didn't really have a good enough pedigree, because it's easier if you've gone to business school at Yale to start something than it is if you haven't. And I figured if I got into one of the top business schools, it'll be worth my time to go in and then start something. So that was kind of my thought process.
Cool. So you've had a lot of academic experience. You studied CS, math, econ. You went to business school. Is there anything out of that you think was most valuable, or has it been the combination of the different verticals?
So I would say early on, certainly my computer science education was like immensely valuable. I didn't know anything about computer science before I went to college. Mathematics, I kind of knew everything before I went there. I was like a very good mathematician growing up. So I didn't have to do much work in college for math. That was good. But computer science was really helpful. I'd say one of the classes I took was a database class, and that's something that just like connected with me. And so I ended up becoming a data architect, and now I'm doing something with data in golf. So I think that one class actually that was the first time I actually dealt with or was open to like how systems deal with data, what the possibilities are. So that was eye-opening. And then I would say there was another like advanced stats class, which kind of is what like AI has kind of come out of. And that was also really interesting. I really loved that class. I did really well in it. I had a really good relationship with the professor. So I would say those two classes in my mind in undergrad stand out. And then in business school, I would say it was really life-changing for me, because I dealt with machines. I dealt with like computers like ever since college. That was kind of my job, was dealing with machines, and really hadn't dealt with humans per se. Like I was dealing with engineers, but mostly on the coding level, code reviews, things like that. But understanding like how to deal with people, motivate people, how to communicate, whether it's to investors or employees or customers. I'd say all those things I learned. I mean, I still learn today, but that learning process started in business school. It opened up my mind to like how people think, how people respond to things. And I would say like Yale's approach on behavioral economics, which is not like people don't respond rationally, was really, really fascinating and interesting. And the experiments that they made us go through here, I still refer back to that.
So where'd the idea for Arccos Golf come from?
So I was, Yale's actually got its own entrepreneurial incubator, YEI, Yale Entrepreneurial Institute. So I was a summer fellow there, and our summer project was putting sensors in golf balls. And I mean, we'd come up with this idea because my background is data, and then my co-founders, we kind of were brainstorming, and I love golf, so like part of the reason I picked Yale, by the way, I mean, I'm crazy about golf, so was the golf course is phenomenal. So I actually I probably spent more time at the golf course than in the classroom, but we won't talk about that. So I was like, summer, good weather, gonna start something. Why don't I start something in golf? And data at that point was, and even today is like revolutionizing every industry, like whether it's advertising through Facebook and Google or transportation, like through Uber, like it's all data. And was doing it for other sports like triathlons or biking, and everybody was tracking that. So in golf, nobody's doing it. So I was like, let's do something in golf, especially because I love it. and it'll allow me to golf more, which actually worked out great. I golf a lot now. So, but I would say it was like part passion, part opportunity.
Yep. So you had a partnership with Callaway pretty early on?
So early on, yeah. So actually, I mean, it's all like funny story. I was, YEI has like I think like at the end of the 8-week fellowship, they have like a final pitch day. And so I shared my pitch, which was like, hey, we're going to track every shot, this, that, do all the data analysis. And one of the people in the audience afterwards came to talk to me, Vicky. And she was like, hey, I know the CEO of Callaway. Do you think you'd be interested in talking to him? And I was like, yeah, that'd be great. And so she introduced me to the CEO of Callaway. Then I got on a phone call with him, told him like what my idea was like track all the data for golfers, give them insights, help them get better. And he said that Callaway had been working on something like basically the same thing for like years, and that was it. So that's how we got connected. And then we were like, if Callaway is doing that, maybe we're behind times.
Yep.
But then we decided that we should probably not do anything at that time. However, Callaway stopped pursuing the idea. So we got an email from Callaway and said that, do you want to take our IP and license it? So we ended up licensing it and took it from there.
How hard was that process, and did you have to convince them to license it to you? Was it a competitive process?
It was, I would say, I don't know if it was competitive. The challenge was that they, like, I would say, like, for them, giving it to, like, unknown people or keeping it in-house will hurt their brand. That was the challenge.
Yep.
And that took a while to convince them. And I'm not sure how they got convinced, honestly. Like, I have no idea. But somehow they're probably like, okay, it's probably better to just give it away than put it on a shelf. And so we kind of took it from there.
So what were the steps from licensing that to getting a product that worked?
From licensing to getting a product, well, honestly, like when we got the technology, it turned out it was like crap. So, which, I mean, a lot of times when you license stuff, you don't know what you're getting till you get your hands on it. So once we realized that it was like crap, we actually scrapped it and we had to build everything ourselves. So, I mean, we got the patents. We actually don't use the patents anymore, but.
So you're building from scratch. What does your team look like? And, did you intentionally hire for certain roles to develop the hardware?
Did we hire? So early on, the team was really small. Once we licensed the patents, I would say the summer of YEI, it was just like me, one of my co-founders, and 2 engineers. But then we were experimenting with stuff.
Yep.
And then once we licensed the patents, we had 2 hardware engineers, 2 software engineers. So it was like a really small team. And we wanted to get to a point where we knew like, okay, tech will work before we start hiring more. And so we kind of like slowly grew.
So was it a challenge to actually get over that hurdle? Did you see it end, or was it, hey, guys working on the hardware, please figure something out? How did you actually get from a license that doesn't work to an end product that does?
So I would say it's like an iterative process. Any product is. The hardware thing is hard. I'd say the most important thing in developing hardware products, getting like rockstar hardware engineers. And we were just lucky that we were able to get it. But otherwise, I would say, honestly, like I'm not a hardware guy. So for me, it was like, let's get the best hardware engineers. And that was my bet. We went through probably like 6 or 7 iterations before we were like, okay, it's working now. But I mean, I would say even today we're going through iterations. But at a certain point, you got to get the product out there and start learning from the users.
How did you convince a rock star to come with you?
That's always hard. how do you convince somebody? Our engine, like the one rockstar I'm talking about, actually moved here from the UK, and I would say part of it is, do they buy in the vision? Like, is this an actual opportunity that will be big? Is it intellectually challenging? I would say for engineers, it's really important for the problem to be intellectually challenging, that they're going to grow, they're going to learn. And I would say the problem that we had, which was detecting golf shots. I mean, while sounds like stupid, is a really complicated problem, because when you think about it, like, we're trying to figure out how do you, when did you make connection with a golf ball? It leads to all these other edge cases where, like, you're taking practice swings, you're throwing the club away, you're doing all these things. You have to isolate all those other things and really figure out when you make impact with a golf ball. That's not easy. And so I would say that was part of it, like, how hard is the problem?
Was it a challenge to finally release the product? I'm guessing it wasn't perfect the first day.
Yeah, it was not
hit the
good.
shelves.
I would say it's still not perfect by any stretch, but I think was it a challenge to get it out? Like, I mean, it's always like I mean, you have a little bit of fear that like everything is gonna go bad, which most of the times it does. And for us, it did too. Like, we always run into issues, and we still do today. But I think if we wait any long, like, it's like you're wasting time. So you just get it out there and start learning.
Before hitting the shelves for the first time, how much did you communicate and talk to potential customers? Were you sort of vision driven, or was it customer feedback, iterative loop?
We actually went through like a pretty involved beta process. Like, we had like 100 beta testers. So we created 100 sets, and we would do beta testing. Actually, probably had 50 beta testers. Then we went to the Yale golf course, went to other places where we would set up shop and hook people up with the sensors and track their data, get their insights, get their feedback. So we were doing all of that. I would say we did a lot. I mean, I don't think we were vision driven as much as we were feedback driven.
Yep. So you launched in Apple stores. How'd you make that happen?
That is a good question. I actually don't know. We went to Apple. We kind of convinced them. Apple obviously is like a tough customer. And so the plan was, if we get into Apple stores, it'll be easier to get into some of the other stores. And so I actually showed up there like really, really early, when we didn't have, like, so our sensors are wireless, but initially they were wired. So there was like a wire dangling. And I showed up with that sensor saying, like, look, we can like detect impact with the golf ball. They're like, okay, so what good is that? And so they still make fun of me, call me the wire guy with wires. So, but I mean, I would say, like, I went there early and started like spending time, and it's just like, I would say effort is required. You got to show up, you got to meet people, you got to talk to them, and that's what I did.
How'd you get that first meeting with them?
First meeting, how did I get that? I'm sure it was a connection through somebody. I'm trying to think. Might have been through Callaway. Yeah, I think it was, I can't remember, but it was like, I would say most of the people I've met is like somebody through somebody through somebody.
What was the first week like after hitting stores?
Exciting. Yeah. Like, we went, I remember the first day we went, so it was funny, like, literally the first time we were in stores was Apple. So that's unusual. But I remember going to, like, with the team to the Apple store. We got a picture taken. That was cool. I mean, it's like cool to see like stuff you've been working on shelf, like, where people can buy it. There's something about that.
How has your team changed since, what you looked like first hitting shelves to what it looks like today, and how strategic has that change been?
So I think when our team on the engineering side has grown, but I guess like a lot of changes around even the management. So we have, when we were early on, like, we were only selling to Apple and a few stores, so we didn't really need like a salesperson. I was just doing the sales. Now we have, since we sell to more stores than that, and we're selling internationally, so I would say the sales and marketing organization's grown. I would say we've become more aware of like the messages that work with our customers. We didn't have a head of product then. We now have a head of product because like with customers, you really got to listen to them. Otherwise, you're wasting your time. So other than the engineering growth, I would say that's like the growth that's happened.
When did you bring on a head of product?
So we've had the first head of product. We have two. We've had two. The first one was about a year after we launched the product. And so actually we started looking like 6 months after because we're like, people are sending like so much feedback. Like, what do we do with this? Like how somebody's got to study it, digest it, and turn it into actionable stuff. And so I would say 6 months after started looking, got somebody a year after, and so we've had a head of product since then.
So I'm guessing this goes into hiring in general, but so how did you think of hiring for that role? But also, I don't know if it's an official rule or an unofficial rule, but I think you require your employees play a whole lot of golf. Was that an intentional decision? Was that to get people buying? How did you think about sort of making that part of your company ethos?
So I would say like it was for us, like we got to do testing. So it came out of necessity. Since we're building the products used on the golf course, it's hard to test it without being on the golf course. So it started as like a necessity. Otherwise we'd ship, like if we didn't test it, we'd be shipping really, really bad product, which we have made that mistake. And so since then, I would say what we've also learned is the people who are the happiest at Arccos are the people who actually golf. It's like it helps with morale, retention, all that stuff. I would say bugs get fixed faster when the programmers are golfing and seeing golf. So I would say it's a combination of that.
Yep. So do you think if, let's say down the road, you took over a fast food restaurant, you'd say everybody's eating this fast food
Well, hopefully not every day, but hopefully they are eating it, so they know what they're making.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's a cool mandate. So you have competitors. How do you think about positioning yourself and sort of what differentiates you?
I think I would say we don't really spend too much time thinking about competitors. We spend more time thinking about what the consumers need and what should we be doing to accomplish that. And so, I mean, that's how we view things. Like, otherwise, I feel like we'll get distracted by what somebody's doing. It might not be. We don't know that. But what we do know is what consumers are saying to us. Let's focus on that and build on that.
What's been the biggest challenge or your worst moment so far?
Biggest challenge? Biggest challenge always like raising money.
Yep.
I'd say that's very hard for startups. Convincing investors to invest is really, really tough. And I would say that continuously for me has been a challenge. And I would say especially since I'm in the golf industry, like the view of the golf industry is that's a dying industry. So it's hard to convince investors to put money. So that's, I would say, been the biggest challenge.
When you go into pitch, what are you pitching and how are you trying to convince investors? From the beginning, was that I'm selling myself or IP or the team? And then today, what role are metrics playing in raising?
I would say we're still too early for metrics. It's still like selling a vision and a dream, which is like, hey, imagine a world where basically every golfer is tracking their data and stats and getting insights and like all the AI around it. I would say it's still that. Like we're still too early for metrics.
Where do you hook people in that pitch? Where are you getting sort of the best response from people?
That you'll have to ask launch.
So you released Arccos Caddy. What was the genesis behind that?
So Genesis was like I would say.
Actually, could you explain to everybody here in case they don't know what it is?
So Arccos Caddy is basically I would say an added feature into like the Arccos ecosystem. So what we do is we track shots and give you how far you hit each shot, where your strengths and weaknesses are using like Moneyball style advanced analytics. But then what we've built on top of that is an AI engine, which we call Arccos Caddy. And what it does is essentially gives you, like, using AI, like a recommendation of what club to use, using your data, applying weather conditions, all that stuff. And I would say the idea probably has existed in one way or another within the company from my time at YEI. Like when I had, actually one of my co-founders is here, Clinton. When we were brainstorming about it and all that stuff, I would say it was always there from the start, but we don't know how to do it. You need data, you need to build it. So luckily ended up partnering with Microsoft, where they provided a lot of I'd say engineering resources behind it. But when you think about it, golf really is like one of the few sports where as you're playing, you have like literally a person right next to you, and at the professional level, the caddy, helping you think through everything you're doing. That's at the professional level. At the amateur level, only 3% of rounds are played with caddy. So the idea was, why don't we bring that same concept to the rest of the 97%?
How do you know it was time to start focusing resources on developing that product rather than what was sort of the core product before?
So I would say, that's a choice we made. That was when we surveyed our users whether they would want this or not. But it's not like we stopped building on the core product. Yep. We're still working on the core product. But I would say this was kind of like a choice we made, was because enough people were saying like, okay, this could be helpful. I mean, I would say jury's still out whether this is going to be a killer feature or not. Certainly it's generated a lot of buzz. And I would say the timing is right because AI is kind of taken over. Like everybody's talking about it, so it just made sense to tap into that and kind of use the tailwind.
How did you end up with the partnership with Microsoft?
Microsoft, so we talked, as we we're going down the AI path, we actually, I got connected to basically most of the major tech companies, and I interviewed all of them. We said like, hey, this is what we're building. How can you help us? What is something that you guys are looking for? And ended up like Microsoft was already involved in golf. They had a partnership with the PGA Tour. So it kind of made sense for them to extend it from the professional platform out to the amateur one. So that's how it went about. But I mean, still, as again, meetings, understanding what their objectives are, getting to know the people, and building on top of that. So
you seem to be a master of partnerships. Is there anything about your approach that you think makes you more successful, or any advice you'd give to people in an industry where they sort of need partnerships to succeed?
Yeah, I would say like understanding the other side's perspective, like what are they looking for, is probably the most important thing. And the way to do that is meeting them and really just listening to what they're saying. And then crafting what you want to do to align with, like if it helps them, then there's hope. But if what you're trying to do has no benefit to them, then it's useless. So really understanding what they want is, I think, more important than even understanding what you want.
How quickly, if you talk to somebody and your needs don't align, is that a relationship you're still nurturing, or do you try to limit the size of your network so that you can focus on perhaps the most valuable?
I say I'll meet anybody.
Yep.
But sometimes it'll become apparent like stuff doesn't align. So rather than force fitting it, I think it's better to move on. But I would say like it's probably dependent situation. If you have like only one company you can partner with, then you probably need to figure out ways, like there might be different organizations within that.
Yep.
That it might work with, where stuff might align. But I would say it kind of depends situation. But if there's a bunch of choices where you can partner with a bunch of different companies and you're picking one, then really just spending time with one isn't a good strategy in my opinion.
Yeah. What's next? Where do you see the company in a year, 3 years? Where do you want it to be?
I honestly I want every golfer tracking their data, their stats, getting insights, making smarter decisions, and then beyond that, using this data to help the entire industry get smarter. And a simple example of that is like the data that we have can help golf courses change their irrigation pattern, because we know where shots are taken, and that can inform like how courses irrigate and save water. That's just like one simple example. But the view is like if everybody's tracking their data, it will make them smarter, making them play more golf, and beyond that, make the entire industry more efficient.
A couple more quick questions, and then we'll open up to Q&A. If you were to get to talk to your 25-year-old self who decides, hey, I'm going to go do what I love, what advice would you give?
It's a good one. What advice would I give? I gotta think about that. It's like, I think staying positive is really important, because startups are tough. There are ups and downs. I would say a lot of downs, and it's important to kind of power through it, fight through it. I think that's probably the most important advice I'd give myself. And then I would say really hiring the best people you can, because you really can't do much by yourself at all. And so finding the best people and really trusting them, I'd say those are probably two things.
How do you stay positive, and how do you keep your team positive if you have a rough week or a rough month?
I'd say by keeping like the eye on the big picture, like this is where we're trying to go. And understanding, having the perspective, like this is part of the process. Like stuff's gonna go wrong all the time in a startup, and that I think having that perspective, like stuff's gonna go wrong. It's fine. You gotta figure out how to turn it around. I think that's key. With the team, I would say the same thing. You like have an open conversation. Like when stuff's not going good, you can't hide it in a small environment. So having like an open conversation around like, hey, we need to together figure out how to fix all of this. Or what can we do to make it better? I think that's important.
Cool. Do you mind passing around the mic, and we'll let people ask questions if they want to? Otherwise, I have some more. Any questions? Oh, yeah. Yeah, you can tell I was in the old building. We didn't have that kind of fancy stuff.
Try out the mic here. You could live anywhere. Why you live in Connecticut?
Connecticut, because my wife's job was in Connecticut, and so we started the company there, and our first office was there, and then I think from New York City it's hard to get to a golf course. So. Yep.
I remember you saying that the best advice you would give your younger self is to hire the best people and just kind of stay tough. Knowing that you were looking to build a growing, thriving business, and what, you're not the only one up here tonight I've heard describe it as a dying industry, the opinions of others. How did you know to keep going and not call it quits when it was rough, and there was necessarily not a really sign that this is going to grow and thrive and I'm going to have the success that I have now? Like, how did you know to keep going?
But I would say I still don't know whether it's going to end up being successful. Why I just keep going because I believe that that's the future. But I would say the reality is it's probably not a rational choice. Just like I would say doing any startup's not rational. But that's what I want to make happen. And so I just kind of keep going.
Is there a call to quit point? I know you don't plan to succeed while holding the back in your mind that if this happens, I want to quit, but and you have to be all in. But is there a call to quit place in your mind?
I don't know. I mean, I would say not right now, but I would say that answer might be different in a year, in 2 years. And I think a lot of it also depends upon whether I'm able to raise money to keep supporting the business and all those things. So once the market says no or investors say like I'm run out of basically every single option, then I have to figure out what else to do. But till then, no.
The average show golfer who's taking mulligans and spraying the ball all over the course may or may not want to relive a bad round of golf.
Yeah.
Have you narrowed down the demographic of golfer who's using your product?
Yeah, so I would say we are. I would say it's actually not really skill dependent in terms of for user base. It's more like how often do they play. So the people who are playing a lot, like I would say over 25 times a year, are way more likely to be interested in Arccos. And I would say generally the more you play, the better you get. So we're not getting the super sprayed around guys.
So you mentioned that you presented your idea on a pitch day, and this is how you get in contact with Callaway and finally ended up with licensing. My question is, what was the level of IP protection on the day when you pitched this idea? You mentioned that you had a patent on it. Did you already have the...
We didn't have any patents. I don't know. That's probably a question for a lawyer. We didn't have any patents or anything like that. If that's your question, like we.
My question is, I have an idea today, and I'm hesitant whether I should share or not. Shall I go for protecting the idea, or what would you recommend in this case?
I would say it probably totally depends upon the idea, and if it's my view is that early on, like it's probably better to share, but I think it probably is more dependent on the specifics of the idea, and you might want to talk to a lawyer before sharing. But I think it depends upon the specifics.
With a consumer product, can you identify some marketing strategies you used initially to get some traction?
So initially we did like a pre-order launch, and we got some email lists of golfers and sent out emails. That was, I would say, for early on pre-order stuff, identifying like avid golfers and going after them worked somewhat decently. I wouldn't say it was like, we didn't do Kickstarter. Maybe that's, when I think back on it, maybe that might have been a good thing to do, but we didn't do it. I think if you're like truly like a broad, like we were very narrow in golf, but if you're like a broader consumer thing, Kickstarter might be a good way to go. Buy an email list. Now, I would say Facebook advertising and things like that, definitely probably way to reach out. But I think before all that, probably is very important to get your message right. Like why is the person gonna buy it? What value, what benefit are they deriving from it? I think that's really important. Yep.
How long did you wait until you started selling internationally, and did you have any challenges with that?
Yeah, international sucks. We waited like probably a couple of years. We recently started doing that 6 months ago, but I would say it's really tough internationally because like all the languages, all the certifications for an consumer electronics product you have to get, and then managing like sales internationally, it's kind of painful. I wish we hadn't done it, but we have to kind of deal with it. But we waited. I would say in reality, I probably should still be waiting. It's that hard because it's like it distracts you, but we've done it, so we'll see. I'll tell you like in a year whether it was a good idea or not. Yep.
So, kind of piggyback on an earlier question, you were in two other startups, and it sounded like both of them had exits, but there are exits that could be like happy exits, and I was in a fire sale exit, so I've been through one, it wasn't fun.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of like the when do you exit is a really important question. Were you involved in the decision stage?
I was in one startup that had an exit. The other one, the exit was we shut it down.
Okay.
So the other startup, no, I was not involved. I was like an engineer. So I don't really have true insights on exits and stuff like that. But I agree, timing is important.
So what was your experience as the engineer when your company is like suddenly part of somebody else's company?
So I had actually already decided to go to business school as that was happening. And it really didn't impact me because I was leaving anyway. So it wasn't like I was going to lose a job, or actually nobody lost a job. So it was like, in that case, it was kind of like a seamless transition for some of the, I'd say probably most of the engineers. But things changed afterwards. When they changed location. Some people stayed, some people didn't. But I would say that was a little bit down the road. But exits, I have zero idea about, and I've never done one. So whatever I say, probably do the opposite.
So when did you go for funding? Did you go for funding with just an idea or after doing the product?
Well, since it started, like at YEI, we were pitching. Before, right when we had the idea, we were already talking to investors. I would say it probably was harder to raise money then than once we got the patents from Callaway. But from, I would say, the start, we were talking to investors.
Did you have a specific amount in mind that you were trying to raise? And did you know how you were going to allocate that money?
Not early on, but post Callaway patents, it was like $5 million is what we're looking for. And yeah, I mean, you have to come up with a plan to allocate and everything. Otherwise, it's like hard to get that money.
How well did you stick to that plan? And how did you sort of balance the fact that to some extent you know you're not going to stick to it?
I'd say you probably always need more money than you think. So that money went a lot faster than I planned on using it, which is true today too. And so I think that's like one of my weaknesses. I'm probably overly optimistic about how the company's going to do in terms of growth and all that stuff. So that's something I'm still learning. So what was the second part of your question?
That was it.
That was it.
Well, actually, how do you sort of go into those conversations knowing it's not going to be perfect? I talked to a lot of startups from a finance perspective, and often they struggle with, I'm doing these projections and I know they're not going to be right, but I've got to.
I'd say I'm still in that camp, and like luckily, I mean, we have a CFO who can guide me somewhat at the board. So it's like I would say like. It's an iterative process, but it's not perfect by any stretch. Like startups have no idea what's going to happen. And so a lot of times you're just guessing. Like you don't know how many people are going to buy it. You literally don't know. So it's like very hard. Like with a established company where you have like a history of revenue and stuff, and then it's much more predictable. But with a startup, it's like highly unpredictable. So it's just like inherent. Yep.
Just kind of continuing on your comments before about decisions to go international, sense a little hesitancy. Is that in arrears, or were you hesitant going in? Was it your decision?
Now, it was my decision. I would say the complexity, I mean, as you get into it, you start realizing all the things you have to do. And so sometimes ignorance is bliss, sometimes not. Maybe it was bliss, I don't know. I mean, I would say we'll find out, like, doing translations, like, now you have to think about, like, your website. You got to share that in all these other languages, the packaging on it, the certification, the import taxes, all, like, it's like so many different things. It's a kind of pain in the ass. Yep.
This is a question for fellow SOMers here. What else do you think you should have done while you were in business school? You mentioned the behavioral economics, YEI. Do you wish you had done something else during your time here that would have better equipped you to be an entrepreneur?
I'd say I don't know what I would have. I really had a really good time at Yale and really learned from the entrepreneurial culture with YEI and stuff. So I don't really, it's hard for me to say what I would have done differently, because I think I took all the classes I want to take, and I was involved and talked to a lot of people in startups during this time. So, but I would say like now, probably spending a lot of time with Kyle. But Kyle wasn't there when I was there. I think I would definitely do that, or Jen. And I think the setup down there, which I think is still there, the startup space, so I'd probably hang out a lot over there. And actually, I met a lot of investors too. I would encourage you to meet a lot of whoever you can, like angel investors or whatever. So you start thinking about like the questions they ask and all that stuff. Yep.
Yes, it seems like I heard you say something earlier on about golf dying out a little bit. And so what I'm wondering is...
I would say that's the perception.
Oh, okay. Well, even with that perception, what I'm wondering is, with golf being one of the most probably celebrated culture built-in disposable income sports that are available, it's hard for me to imagine outside of licensing and motion capture technology that you aren't also looking at other investment opportunities. So I'm wondering is what other areas you're looking at as an entrepreneur right now outside of just sports and motion capture?
Outside of sports. So you're saying like if I were to start something today, what would I do?
No, not necessarily. If you were just to invest in something outside of your current area of interest.
I would say probably something around like transportation. And like, I mean, I would say we're in early days of what Uber and Via and all these other transport, like autonomous vehicles, all that stuff, like really, really early days. So I think there's a bunch of opportunity there. So I'd probably look there. That's what I would be interested in.
So more individual or more large players like buses and
Either.
trains?
Either. I think like all that's going to change. So I would probably dig deeper in terms of like how is all this technology going to impact that and change that.
Now that you're in charge of how many people are in your company, how much do you think about how you lead and how you communicate? Because you come across as very smart and humble, but you're confident in what you're doing. I don't know about this or I know that, and so I don't know how much you think about how you come across with your employees, and are you different with different people? Do you think about that?
I'd say, like, I try to share exactly what I think. Because otherwise, and especially in a startup, like it's such a small environment that people will, I mean, if you're not being honest, like people see it or feel it. And then it gets difficult to be on the same team together and getting through like all the challenges that are going to be there.
Has it evolved as the company gotten bigger? That you have people like Kyle that you can still be like that tight with, but then as you have,
I mean, we have like, we're still small, we're like 26, 27 people. So I can still be that way. But I would say once it gets bigger, I don't know. I guess I'll have to learn how to deal with it.
Any more questions?
It seems like going international is a new growth market for companies. Where do you see your company in the next 2 years? If international is so challenging.
But I think we're definitely staying with the international path. We'll see like how we doing it. I think we'll have to learn on how to, because every country, every culture is different. So as a result, every market is different. So the messages will be different and all that stuff. So in terms of where I see it, I mean, actually I'm figuring out what next year is going to look like right now. So I don't know. Like our goal is to keep growing. And that's what I'm trying to do. Yep.
Do you see a use for your technology in other things that you swing? Baseball bats, tennis rackets, hockey sticks?
Good question. The technology that we have really doesn't have an application in other sports because we're not tracking your swing mechanics. We're just tracking whether you made impact with the golf ball or not. So it's like a yes or no kind of thing. And I mean, I wish it had application, but we've thought about it a lot, and it doesn't. At this point, it doesn't.
How'd you go about getting the Cobra partnership and other
Cobra partner? So I would say,
do you have on the horizon with future companies?
yeah, so basically, I would say talking to literally every golf CEO and trying to convince them like, hey, this is the future, this will help you. So in Cobra's case, they're like one of the smallest golf companies, so it allows them to differentiate their product. And I think that was what led to the partnership.
I know that early on, I guess my questions are, in these early stages, one, how are you finding the great people that you're hiring and the people that you want to partner with you to raise funds? And then two, what are you pitching? Are you pitching you, or are you pitching the product or service? How are you distinguishing yourself?
So how am I finding people? I'd say through people you know is probably early on. To me, I mean, that's how we found like the best people. We've also used LinkedIn, also gone to like tech meetups and things like that to find people. How am I finding investors? I would say just through other investors. So I would say when you meet a potential investor or somebody who invests, that you ask them who else would be interested, who else would be. So just please introduce me, like just connecting. And then what was the other question?
What are you pitching? So you get someone, are you pitching you?
I would say in a sense they are judging me, but I don't think I go in saying like, you got this, I got this, like this is it. So I think I think they're in essence judging you, whether they should invest in you, but you're showing that through maybe stuff that your vision or how you're going to execute, the people you've put around you. So they are judging you.
We have time for 2 more questions. If nobody has them, I'll steal them. Do you hear any advice for startups that you just think, no, that's terrible advice?
Hard to generalize. I couldn't come up with something to say like that's.
Yeah.
I would say maybe like when people say just don't do it, like that's a bad idea. Like I'm like, we don't know that.
Yeah. Last one. How important is the team around you outside of work, and how, you said you can't go in halfway, so how do you make sure that everything that happens outside of startup is supporting it and still is, you're staying happy?
Mm-hmm. I would say I interact with my team outside of work as much as, like a lot. I'll hang out with them. I actually end up traveling because I'm traveling quite a bit with the team. We do, like the golfing thing is outside work. So I think it's important to interact with your coworkers outside the work environment because it builds better relationships. And I would say new ideas might come out of it, or you get to know things that you might not otherwise in like the formal, constricted work environment. So I think it's really important, and I think that's where like the boundary between work and fun maybe becomes stronger as in meshing and more.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Appreciate it.